Nobody alive knows the real name for bear. Not linguists, not historians, not anyone. Because thousands of years ago, our ancestors made a collective decision to erase it. They were so convinced that speaking the word out loud would summon the animal that they stopped using it entirely, replaced it with a polite little nickname, and the original word vanished from every language it touched. What we say today, bear, brown one, is a euphemism, a workaround, the linguistic equivalent of refusing to say Voldemort. Picture Northern Europe roughly 5,000 years ago. Dense boreal forest, long winters, no metal weapons worth speaking of. The people living there, Proto-Germanic tribes spread across what is now Scandinavia, Germany, and the Baltic coast, shared a common ancestor language and a common set of very real dangers. At the top of that danger list was an animal that could weigh half a ton, sprint faster than a horse over short distances, and tear through a wooden shelter without much effort. This was not an abstract fear. This was a daily, practical, survival-level terror. And in many ancient cultures, naming a thing was believed to invoke it. To speak the name of a predator in the forest was to call it toward you. So communities developed workarounds, polite substitute words, ways of referencing the dangerous thing without technically naming it. Linguists call this taboo deformation, and the bear became one of its most dramatic victims. Origin story. The word bear comes to us through Old English as bera, and before that from Proto-Germanic, reconstructed by linguists as something close to bero. The root of that word is the Proto-Germanic verb beranen, meaning to carry or to bring. So, at its most literal, bero meant something like the brown carrier, or more precisely, the brown one. But brown what? Brown animal? Brown creature? That is almost certainly a translation of an even older color-based nickname. The Proto-Indo-European root that gives us words for brown is where the trail starts to get fascinating and where the real story lives. Here's where we need to talk about comparative linguistics, the science of reconstructing dead languages by comparing their living descendants. In the late 18th century, a British judge named Sir William Jones was working in Calcutta. In 1786, he delivered a lecture to the Asiatic Society in Bengal that would change the study of language permanently. Jones observed that Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Gothic, and Persian shared grammatical structures and vocabulary patterns too consistent to be coincidental. He proposed they all descended from a single common ancestor. That ancestor language is what we now call Proto-Indo-European. By the 19th century, German philologists, most notably Jacob Grimm, yes, the fairy tale collector, working in Berlin in the 1820s and 1830s, began systematically mapping the sound shifts that connected Proto-Indo-European to its daughter languages. Grimm's law, formalized around 1822, showed how consonants shifted predictably as Latin became Germanic languages. A P in Latin often became an F in Germanic. A T became a TH. These were not random changes. They were systematic. This work gave linguists the tools to reconstruct lost vocabulary. And when they applied those tools to the word for bear, what they found was a conspicuous silence. In Proto-Indo-European, there should be a root word for bear. Every major animal has one. Horse, cow, dog, wolf. They all trace back to reconstructed PIE roots. But bear has no clean PIE ancestor. Instead, different branches of the language family independently developed their own replacement words, each one a different euphemism describing the animal without naming it. The Latin word for bear is ursus, and the Greek is arktos, which gives us Arctic, literally the region of the bear. The Slavic languages use forms of medved, which means honey-eater, and the Germanic languages, including English, use forms of that color-based nickname, the brown one. 4 separate branches of the same language family, 4 completely different substitute words, all pointing to the same conclusion. The original word was deliberately abandoned, in multiple cultures, independently, because it was considered too dangerous to say. The earliest written records we have of the Old English word bera appear around the year 1000 in manuscripts from the late Anglo-Saxon period. The word had already been in use for centuries before that, carried into Britain with Germanic settlers. By the time anyone was writing it down, the original PIE word it replaced had been gone for perhaps 2,000 years. The misconception here is where most people get this story slightly wrong. The popular version says our ancestors were so superstitious they thought saying a word would literally teleport a bear to their location. That is a colorful way to put it, but it misses the actual logic at work. Taboo deformation is not pure superstition in the way we use that word today. It is a socially enforced linguistic convention with a practical origin. In communities where bears were genuine apex predators, maintaining quiet in the forest mattered. A word that was used frequently and casually might be spoken loudly without thought at the wrong moment. Building a cultural prohibition against the word itself was a way of enforcing caution. The belief that the name summoned the animal was the mechanism, but the outcome was behavioral. People learned not to name bears carelessly. What makes the bear case remarkable is the completeness of the erasure. With most taboo words, the original survives in some dialect, some formal register, some religious text. With the PIE word for bear, we have nothing, not a fragment. Linguists have proposed possible reconstructions, sometimes written as something like H2RTKO, the root that also gives us the Greek arktos. But this is speculative. We cannot be certain. The word was erased so thoroughly that the erasure itself is the most complete record we have. Modern echoes. This pattern of replacing feared or uncomfortable words with softer alternatives did not stop in the Bronze Age. We do it constantly. English speakers say pass away instead of die. We say let someone go instead of fire them. We say correctional facility instead of prison. Every generation inherits old euphemisms and invents new ones, often without realizing the mechanism is identical to what Proto-Indo-European speakers were doing when they stopped saying the name of the bear. The specific word bear also left its mark in geography. The constellation Ursa Major uses the Latin ursus, the bear. The Arctic takes its name from the Greek arktos. Berwick, a town in northern England, carries the Old English bera in its first syllable. Arthur, the name, has a contested etymology, but one strong scholarly argument traces it to the Celtic root for bear as well. The bear is everywhere in our language, hiding under different names, which is exactly how it survived. Deeper connections. The Proto-Germanic root beranen, to carry or to bring, that underlies the name bero spread in unexpected directions. The Old English verb beron, meaning to carry, to bear a burden, to give birth, to endure, is the same root. When we say a woman bears a child, or someone bears a grudge, or a tree bears fruit, we are using a word whose oldest ancestor was applied to the animal because it was seen as the great carrier, the brown one who carried itself through the forest with terrible weight and purpose. Old Saxon and Old Frisian both used bera for bear and for the act of carrying. Old Norse had bera meaning both the animal and the verb. Old High German used beron. The doubling is not coincidence. The animal's name and the verb for carrying came from the same place, and in the Germanic languages they stayed intertwined. The name Bernard comes from this root. Bern, the capital of Switzerland, has a bear on its coat of arms and very likely takes its name from the same Germanic bero. The Russian word for bear, medved, chose a completely different euphemism, honey-eater, but the instinct was identical. Do not name it. Describe it. Keep some distance between the word and the thing. Jacob Grimm,